Hello, my name is Dick Feeny. Welcome to my show. Today we're going to talk about bridges. First we'll start out with the different types of bridges, and then we'll go into a few of the record bridges worldwide. Then we're going to go right here to the Chippewa Valley and look at the bridges in Eau Claire and the near vicinity. And then we'll finish up with some of those that are very interesting but close by. We have a few riddles that we'll ask today, and we'll sort of solve them as we go through the program. What's the longest span? What's the highest bridge? What bridge is a fast food item? His nickname is a fast food item. Does Eau Claire have a covered bridge? Does Eau Claire have a suspension bridge? And what bridges have the names of presidents? And now on with the show. Well, the earliest type of bridge was the natural bridge. These existed for centuries and centuries ago in the natural state. The next step of the bridge was the log across the river. And this is the first bridge in two senses of the word. This is the very first bridge across the Mississippi River at the outlet of Lake Itasca up in Minnesota. Next we went to the covered bridge. This is a wooden bridge that were all through the United States. This particular one is down near Mason City, Iowa. And one of our questions was, does Eau Claire have a covered bridge? Well, it certainly does. It goes right across Claremont Avenue. It's not covered in the traditional sense, but it is a covered bridge. The next type of bridge we had was the stone arch bridge, or the concrete arch. This particular one is unique in that it carried a waterway over the top of another river. This was on the Potomac Canal. This is crossing the Monocacy River, and the upper part of the bridge actually carried a channel of water which they towed canal boats on. This is another arch bridge. This is a railroad viaduct in Pennsylvania, the Tunkhannock. And this is about the most exotic arch in the country. This is on the Natchez Trace down near Nashville. Another type of bridge that we had is the trestle. These were used in the early railroading days, and many of these are still in existence in Colorado. And they improved on this to the stage of this. This one is over a mile long, and it's 302 feet high. This is also a railroad trestle. And this gives you an impression of how tall it is when you're down at the bottom of it. And it's big enough for a train to run on the top. This one is in Lethbridge, Alberta, just across the Canadian border. Well, these are some of the types of bridges. This is what they call a pony truss. And the pony truss was not connected at the top. And there are different heights of them. They can be low, only railing height, or they can be a little higher, but they're not, the two trusses are not connected. This particular one is at Coon Forks, is the old bridge at Coon Forks Dam. This is a through truss. This is one that's actually connected at the top. The two trusses are connected, and you actually drive through the truss, so it's called a through truss. This particular one is called also a camelback because of the arch to it. This one is the old Troubled Waters Bridge. It's on the Eau Claire River on County Trunk G north of Augusta. This one has been replaced too. I believe the bridge is still in use as a snowmobile trail. This is a very unique bridge in Pittsburgh. This one was designed by Gustav Lindenthal, and originally started out as just a single lane, and they later enlarged it and duplicated another side to it and made it a two-lane bridge. And this is the extreme longest steel bridge of the steel truss type. This one is in Astoria, Oregon, crossing the mouth of the Columbia River. This is the first bridge that you come to as you come upstream on the Columbia River. And the length of this is 1,233-foot span, which is quite a long span for a truss bridge. It's the longest one in the world. Then we come to what they call the cantilever bridge, and this is one that is actually suspended from the sides and holds its own weight as they're building it. And this is the very first steel cantilever bridge. This is in St. Louis, called the Eads Bridge, and was designed by Eads. And this is constructed from the sides. You can see that it holds its own weight while it's being constructed. And that's the principle of the cantilever, is that it's self-supporting. Now, one of the greatest cantilever bridges is across the Firth of Forth in Scotland, and this is a railroad bridge. Each one of these diamonds will stand completely by itself and hold the weight of a train out at the ends of its arms. And the tops of those trusses are 300 feet above the water, actually about 350 feet. And then there's a little regular truss that supports the in-between. So it has a span of 1,710 feet between each of those. This is a colossal, huge thing. It looks like it doesn't look too big, but it's you see those little spans that you can run a train through. That the train looks pretty small on this bridge when it's out there. It's a tremendous size to it. Another steel arch bridge is one of the higher ones. This is the bridge at the Glen Canyon, where they're building the Glen Canyon Dam in the background. They first built the bridge across, and then they proceeded to build the dam, and they used the bridge to get materials back and forth across. And this is where they're building the first part of the dam. They dammed up the river, and they made a channel to divert the water through a tunnel underneath the side of the bank while they're building the dam. And they built these tracks here. You see there's a crane on this track. These cranes can run back and forth on this track, and there's a matching one on the other side with a cable to it. So they can run something out on this cable and down to any point on this whole valley floor there to do the building. And this is what it looked like when the dam was finished. That bridge is 700 feet above the water. So the dam is also that high. Now I'll talk about suspension bridges. This is a very small suspension bridge, but it follows the same principle. The principle of the suspension bridge is that you have a cable goes up over a tower, and here you can see the cable goes in an arc over to the other tower. And this is what carries the weight, is that cable. These are capable of doing much longer spans than a steel truss would do. Well, this is a suspension bridge. It isn't actually too long, but what's unique about this one is that it's high. And this is the highest bridge in the world. It's 1,053 feet above the water. This is probably the most famous suspension bridge and one of the earliest. This is the Brooklyn Bridge. Was designed by John Roebling and his son Washington, I believe. And both of them ended up being in trouble over this. One of them had his foot smashed and died of tetanus, and the son had to take over. And he became sick from what they call caisson's disease, from working down in the footings of the piers. It's like having the bends for a diver. And he was incapacitated, and finally his wife delivered all the messages. He sat in his room and watched out the window and gave directions, and she carried him to the workers on the job. This bridge has a span of 1,590 feet and was built in 1883 and is still standing and doing a great job. The next is the George Washington Bridge. Was built in 1931, and this one is the first bridge across the Hudson River. At that low latitude, where it's quite wide. This is just upstream from Manhattan. And this has a span of 3,500 feet. Now, it originally was built as a single deck, and later on, to strengthen it, had a little bit of sway to it, and so that to strengthen it, they built the extra truss on the bottom and decided that they could then put another deck. So they have one deck going one way and the other deck going the other way. This is the Golden Gate Bridge. This, of course, was one of the most famous ones, and for many years was the longest in the world at 4,200 feet, spanning the San Francisco Bay. It's built in 1937, and the towers are 746 feet high. And the deck is 220 feet above the water. It has to be high enough for ocean-going ships to go underneath it. This is a view from on the bridge. The next one of interest was the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. It was built in 1940, and this was only a 2-lane wide bridge, and to save weight, they'd made it very thin. And for some reason, the wind picked up a harmonic with this bridge, and anytime we had even a 40-mile-an-hour wind, it would start to sway. And here you can see it's starting to self-destruct. Some of the cables are broken, and the deck is going into wild gyrations. It twisted more than 90 degrees, and it eventually collapsed. Well, then they replaced this with a wider 4-lane bridge with a very strong truss underneath it, and they have no more trouble with it. Now the next one, going a little bit long, it's a longer bridge, but it doesn't have a longer span, is the Mackinac Bridge across the end of Lake Michigan going to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. This was nicknamed the Big Mac. That has a span of 3,800 feet. And was built in 1957. The towers are 552 feet high. There's 42,000 miles of wire, and it's 24-inch cables. There's a view going across the Mackinac Bridge. You can see both towers there. Well, the longest bridge in the United States is the Verrazano Narrows. This one is up the San Francisco Bridge by 60 feet, so it's got a span of 4,260 feet. This is the very first bridge on the Hudson River going from Brooklyn to Staten Island. And you can see Manhattan in the distance. This was built in 1964. Now there's several, at least 5 others worldwide that are longer than the Verrazano Narrows. And the very longest is this Akashi Kaiko Bridge in Kobe, Japan, which is 6,527-foot span and 928-foot towers. They're almost as tall, those towers are almost as tall as the Eiffel Tower. This is the longest suspension span, longest span of any type in the world. But now they're going to a new type of suspension bridge they call the cable-stayed bridge. This particular one is the LaPorte Bridge in Baytown, Texas. It crosses the San Jacinto River that runs up to Houston. And this is another one. This is on the Sunshine Skyway across the Tampa Bay in Florida. And that has a 1,200-foot span. This was built in 1987. Now, you see the old bridge was in the background there and it has a chunk missing out of it. What happened is that a freighter got loose in a storm and crashed into the bridge and knocked it down. And for a while they were able to use the other span. There were two parallel spans there, but for a while they were using just the other span. Now they've opened this one up for two-way traffic, and the old one has been removed. Well, now we're going to go back and talk about some of the bridges in the Eau Claire area. And we're starting out at Caryville. And this is the old Caryville ferry. For many years it took people across the Chippewa River from for Dunn County, because part of Dunn County was on the south side of the river. This was so people could get to the county seat without having to drive all the way to Eau Claire. Now, in 1963, the ferry was replaced, and you can see they're building the bridge in the background there. See, the old house on the side of the other side of the river was the ferry keeper's house. And you could come at just about any time and honk the horn, and if it was an emergency, he would come across and pick you up. This was a power-driven one. It had an old Model A Ford engine on it to run it back and forth, but originally it was current-powered, and they just twist the ferry into the current, and the cable which ran upstream across the river would keep the ferry tilted at that angle, and the current would drive it across. This is a picture of that 1963 bridge across Caryville. This is the old boat landing. On the north side is the old approach to the ferry, and over here you can see the old approach, and the old ferry keeper's house is still there. They did a very nice job. We did a display for the Chippewa Valley Museum recently, and had this slideshow over there. They have a bridge display on, and they used this picture and put it on the cake. With a photographic method, they could put the picture right on the frosting of the cake that they served. Going on up the Chippewa River, the next ferry we came to was the Hadley's Ferry. This was operational in 1873, and this was near the end of Ferry Street in Shawtown, down near where the sewage disposal is. And what do you suppose is there now? This is right where I-94 crosses today. These bridges were built in 1967. The next bridge upriver is the Shawtown Bridge. There were bridges built there as early as 1887, and this was one of the old wooden bridges, and one of these bridges had a span of 275 feet, which at that time was considered to be the longest wooden span. There were additional bridges built there, and this old blue bridge is built in 1925, and now that has been replaced with this current bridge, was built in 1998. Going on upstream to Claremont Bridge, this is the first bridge on Claremont Avenue. This is the one that will be replaced in just a few years. This one was built in 1942, or opened in 42, and this is when it's under construction. This is a picture of the finished bridge taken a few years ago. You can see the old red building in the background was the old sauerkraut factory, and next to the railroad track was an old junkyard across the river there. Things have changed quite a bit down in this location. And especially they've added the second bridge in 1991, a 3-lane bridge. The old one was only 2-lane. Here they're laying the beams for the second Claremont Bridge. And shortly they will be replacing the one on the right with another similar 3-lane bridge. Next bridge upstream is the old Chicago-Milwaukee-St. Paul Railroad Bridge at Shawtown. This was one of the old original ones. You can see it looks like they've patched it a few times. It's got a couple of different spans on it. This was the old wooden bridge. And you can see it's all propped up with piling underneath it. And some of that piling is still visible today underneath the bike trail. This is the current bridge in 1941 when they were just starting to do the fill for Claremont Avenue, just above the bridge in the background. This was the 1941 flood. It was one of the higher floods in the area, but not as high as the one that was in 1884. Here's a picture of the old railroad bridge before it was converted over to the bike trail, when it still had railroad tracks on it. Now the rails have been removed and a floor has been put on and railing and is part of the bike trail. Next one upstream is the University Footbridge. This was built in 1970. Going on up, we come to the Water Street Bridge. This is one of the first bridges at Water Street. It was built in 1887. It was an old wooden truss. And the thing that's unique about this is that it did not connect to Summit Avenue, but connected to Gilbert Avenue. It was about a block and a half north. This is also taken during a flood. I don't know just which one it was, but it did survive this flood. There's another view from the west side. There's a hole in the picture that was the original copy that was taken. But this you can see, this is at a flood when water is running across Water Street, which it has done quite a few times, even in recent days. Although the old bridge was condemned and it stood there for a while, and then in 1914 they built this beautiful concrete arch bridge that connected to Water Street. But that was not too long-lived either, because in 1945 one of the eastern pier undermined and collapsed and sank down about 8 feet or so, and you can see the big dip in the railing of the bridge here. It sort of tipped sideways and sank. And right while a car was going across it, and the fellow was able to get up the thing. It didn't completely fall in, but it was all sagged. Then he made it up out from there and survived. Here you can see the dip in the bridge. People still walked across it and are out there peering over the edge and thought, it must be, it's standing here, it must be perfectly safe. But it wasn't too long before the whole thing collapsed into the river. The first two spans went, and then it sort of went like dominoes, and it kept collapsing till there was only one span left on the west side that was entirely over land. Well, this was during wartime, and they couldn't replace it. At the time, there were no materials or workers to build it, so we did without a bridge until 1947. When the present bridge was built, which was a steel beam truss or beam type bridge. Well, going upstream a little further, we come to the Lake Street Bridge. Here it's under construction in 1972. There never was a bridge at this location before. The decision was made to reroute the traffic east to west to Lake Street and give up the old Grand Avenue Bridge. Here's the finished Lake Street Bridge. Well, this is an aerial view of Eau Claire in 1872. And the first crossing they had of Eau Claire was the Billy Gann's Ferry. And there were a lot of steamboats that ran on the river at that time yet, and lumber rafts that went down, so you couldn't have a structure that impeded the travel on the river. So the way Billy Gann's Ferry worked, it went here from the end of Gibson Street, which at that time was called Ferry Street, and it crossed back and forth here. And instead of having a cable strung across, which had been an interference to the steamboats, they ran their cable upstream up to the point between the Eau Claire and the Chippewa rivers, and then it could swing back and forth on that cable. That was operational in 1861, was the first real connection that they had between the two halves of the city. And by 1872, these were actually separate towns on either side, and by 1872 they agreed to all together and create one city of Eau Claire. And that's when they decided to build this bridge across at Grand Avenue. This was built in 1869. It's a wooden bridge, and it has a rather strange looking end on it here. I will look at that closely, and that was a rotating draw. I can see that this part here can rotate on this pier and open up for steamboats to go through on either side of it. Originally this was called the Kelsey Street Bridge, but when they connected it all together, they finally decided to call all the streets on either side, which had several different names, that connected it all together and called it Grand Avenue. They had to have this draw to allow the steamboats to get through, because at that time they went as far up as Chippewa Falls, and they had to maintain traffic on the river, so no dams or bridges could be built that would interfere the travel of steamboats. This is the view of the west end of that, or east end of that bridge. You can see it's a wooden truss, and the sign up here says it's $25 fine for running your horse or going faster than a walk. A trotting horse sets up an awful vibration and could destroy a bridge quite easily. You can see these are wooden piers, and they're made with a sort of a pointed ramp on the front of them. That was to break the ice when it came down. They were actually quite fragile, and that was there to break the ice in the wintertime. It would run onto that point and raise up and divide and break off. Well, there's what happened to that 1869 bridge. This is the flood of 1884, was the highest on record on the Chippewa River. You can see this is looking west. This is the water is up about to 2nd Avenue, be right at the foot of the courthouse here. And all of these buildings on 1st Avenue are underwater. This is a pile of debris that's sitting on the first pier of the bridge, and the bridge is long gone. This is a picture taken just as the water is going down. You see the piers are still here. Here's the pile of debris that was sitting on the first pier. And you can see the awful destruction that's taken place. The buildings are all twisted and they're not floated away, but they're damaged to the point where they're very dangerous to be in. This one here is all collapsed. There's just a terrible mess to clear up there after the 1884 flood. And besides that, they lost the bridge and they had no way of connecting across. The only bridge that survived was the old railroad high bridge, and that was a very scary thing that was 82 feet above the water and only one railroad track wide with no plank to walk on. It was the only way to get from one side of the river to the other. Or the other way, of course, was by boat. This is the new Grand Avenue Bridge, or it was still called Kelsey Street at this time. They built these big granite piers, and they had this wooden truss bridge that they opened in 1887. So there were a few years that they were out without a bridge at this location. Then in 1899, they built the steel truss bridge that many of us remember was built on the same granite piers. And but this was back in the days. Here we still have a side-wheeler steamboat, excursion steamboat, running on the Chippewa River. This building is sort of interesting to me because I worked in this building. The highway department was upstairs in this building, and many times I went up and down that stairway going to work. This is the Grand Avenue Bridge the day it closed. This was in 1972, after the Lake Street Bridge was opened. This one was closed to traffic. And it was kept open for foot travel for a while because a lot of people thought it was too far to walk way down to Lake Street and then come back again. People had, for years, had walked across this bridge. And so it was decided to retain the old piers and build a new footbridge across. And that's the way it looks today. And it's still built on the same original granite piers down below here. And what became of the railing of the old Grand Avenue Bridge? It's now out at a private estate on County Trunk I. Go out 53 and take a left on County Trunk I past the interstate. And you'll eventually cross Otter Creek and you come and find this on the right. This is the old railing to the Grand Avenue Bridge. The next bridge upstream is the other Milwaukee Road Bridge. At one time, the Milwaukee Road had 4 bridges crossing the Chippewa River within the city limits of Eau Claire. This is the one that is now part of the bike trail that connects from 1st Avenue. Originally, they had a walkway along the side, And now that's been removed, and the walkway is put out on the main bridge, and that's also the bike trail. Well, the next one up the line is the Madison Street Bridge, and that was washed out in the flood, of course, as every other bridge was, and at one time it was washed away, and they actually found it downstream, and they dismantled it and hauled it back in wagons and put it back up again. And then in 1897, this was still a wooden bridge. In 1897, it burned down, and this is the results of the fire. You can see the pier is all burned up, just a few of the stubs sticking up there. And the western three spans burnt down in about 20 minutes. It was very hot and dry weather, and this was somewhat treated timber, and it burned just like matchsticks. And the whole thing burned up in 20 minutes. They were able to save the far eastern span. You can see it's still standing way on the right there. Well, then they replaced the three western spans with steel arch camelback truss, and those stayed there until 1923. This was taken just about the time they were thinking about replacing it. And you can see that the old wooden truss on the right side is still in place, but it's got pretty shaky, and they put some added supports underneath it. And actually, while this was still in place, in about 1903, there was a carnival was operating down on the east side of the river at along Forest Street, and they had a ride they called the Loop-the-Loop, in which they had, let a car run down a ramp, and it would go around up over a loop, much like our modern roller coasters do. Only it was just a single car, and I think they only had someone from the circus ride in it. You didn't get to ride in it yourself. It was just the fact that it would go around the loop, and it was quite a unique thing at the time. And many people came up and stood on the bridge to watch this thing. Well, this whole section of the railing of that old wooden span fell off, and a lot of people were hurt in it in 1903. This is a view there. You can see the old railing. It's part of the railing that was replaced after that fell off. It's on the right side there. You can also see the lamination of the wood truss here on the side. You can see that it's made up out of planks welded together. This also has the fine for going faster than a walk with a horse across there, but it was not built for the weight of trucks and automobiles, and it was getting pretty shaky. You can see the roadway looks like it's even humped up a little bit there, and very, very close passing even for the old narrow cars. Well, then in 1923 they started removing this bridge. This is looking east. This is where they're taking down the last wooden span there. On the left is a part of the old hydroelectric Northern States substation building. And on the right is the Phoenix Manufacturing. This is one of the buildings that they manufactured the Phoenix log haulers in, the old steam type locomotive that they used in the woods to haul logs with. This is a view looking west. You can see they're starting to form the arches to a concrete bridge there. The building with all the smoke coming out of it was the Lang Canning Company. It was right on the corner of Madison and Oxford Avenue. Here you can see how they formed the forms for the arch concrete. And here's how it was poured. They carried it out on this railroad track that's along the edge. They brought all the concrete out in bucket cars along this railroad, and then they would wheel it crossways over to the bridge. They'd build separate little walkways, and they carried in these two-wheeled burros, they call them. They were a bucket suspended on an axle like that, and they'd wheel them over and dump them into the farm. Now, I like the way this guy is standing so close to the edge here on the left without thinking of it, with his back to the drop-off there, completely unbothered by the heights entirely. There are some of the finished arches. You can see the steel sticking up out of them to connect to the vertical members of the spandrel type arch. You can see up on the top of the hill, you can see the old Sacred Heart Church with its twin towers on it, and the big huge schoolhouse on the left of it. Well, this is the bridge that they finished then in 1924. Had beautiful round globe lights on it. And in 1977, they discovered that the salt had gotten to this bridge, and they decided they had to replace it. And here they're demolishing all those nice stone arches, or concrete arches again. They had to use blasting powder to knock them down with, though. Well, these are just a kind of a quick resume from different views. This is the old original steel bridge. They had the wooden one at the far end. This is looking from the west side. This is the 1924 bridge, the day it opened, with Model T Fords going across it. There you can see the globe lights quite well. And this is the present bridge in 1977 when that opened. You can see up at Sacred Heart Church, they've taken the tall pointed spires off and put more round domes on the church. And the big tall school building is down to a one-story building that's low and flat. The next bridge is upstream was the High Railroad Bridge. This was the first bridge built there in 1871 when the train first came through. It was a wooden bridge. Went from bluff to bluff pretty much like the present day one does. But it was all wood with the wooden forms and about the same height, just a little bit lower than the present one. Well, they decided this was not really a good bridge to have for a permanent bridge. And so they built the present bridge in about 1880 and built the tall granite piers that it sits on. If you look in the back here, you can see the old wooden bridge right behind it. This extra line across here, this is the old wooden bridge standing behind the present steel bridge. It's still here today. And there's a view when the old wooden bridge is taken down. You see these beautiful tall granite piers here. This is what saved it during that 1884 flood. And you can see today, you can still see the mark where that flood was. It came up to about here on those piers. A tremendous high flood. This is the old flume that came from Dell's Pond running along here, and you can see the water pouring out of it. It's got several holes in it to take the pressure off, and when they weren't using it, they'd open up gates on it and let the water out so that it wouldn't put so much weight on the flume as long as it wasn't being used. When they were actually floating logs through, they'd close those up and the water would go straight on through, delivering it all the way down, clear through to Half Moon Lake. Well, this is a view today. Here you can see that mark on the piers where the high water was of the high flood. This is a view from the top. It's 82 feet above the water. And this is not an easy bridge to walk across because there's no plank in the middle, and the ties are far enough apart that you could easily stick your foot between it. So you have to look down, and the water is quite fast. There's quite a rapids there. The water is quite fast underneath, and that standing up there with practically no horizon to work with, and that fast-moving water that you have to look past that to see where you're stepping is quite difficult to walk on this bridge. Well, then in 1910, they built the double-track bridge a little bit further. This is north of the dam, and this is the bridge that's still being used as the main line. This picture was taken in 1985 when they had the return of the 400, which is, of course, the crack streamliner that we had in Eau Claire for many years. Here's another view of that bridge. This, the return of the 400, they only had a couple of yellow cars, and they sort of pieced it together with a motley collection of other different ones, including a Vistadome, which we never had on the 400, but it still made a very nice ride, and having the yellow engine at least put us in the spirit of things. This is Mount Eden in the background there. Another view of the same bridge looking a little bit to the right, and we see the mount on the other side is Mount Simon. Both of these are named for Randalls, Eden Randall and Simon Randall. And now just upstream of that bridge was another bridge, was on the Milwaukee Road. And that came underneath the big high bridge and underneath this bridge and went around here. And the track was still in position here at this time, and they were loading cordwood in there for the paper mill. But originally it went all the way around here, and you can see a kind of a line that came out here was an abutment and went across. And this is where the other two bridges on the Milwaukee Road were when it went to Chippewa Falls. There were two bridges on the Chippewa River. And here's a picture. There's the track going under the double track bridge. It went around and made a loop, and it came back across. And this is the abutment on the west side of the river right here, the old granite abutment. Now here's an aerial view looking straight down. This is the double track Chicago Northwestern Bridge. The old Milwaukee Road came up Forest Street and went underneath these two bridges. Then it made this curve. This is Mount Simon right here. Went across here, and here's the granite abutment. That little white spot there is the granite abutment. And went right up Wells Road. Is how Wells Road, you know, and before its present being rebuilt, there was just a very narrow fill across this marsh area here. Well, that was because it was originally just a railroad track. It went on up here. This is what they used to call Breezy Point, was a swimming place here. Well, then there was an island. You can see where it went. There was a bridge to this island, and then there was another bridge that went all the way across here to Riverview Park. It came out and went up along through where the present Wells area is. And in 1884, both of these bridges washed out. This one here and this one here both washed away. And they never rebuilt them because there was too much expense to build two bridges, and they decided instead that they went up along, the Milwaukee Road was rerouted up along by Uniroyal and up along the Highway 53 up as far as the VFW Club, and there it went on down the hill again along what's now Riverview Drive. And that's how Riverview Drive gets that nice easy slope to it. And it went down here like this and connected up to the same route going on to Chippewa Falls. And that route was used until about 1926. And that followed all along the river. If you go along the lower side of Lake Hallie, you're actually driving on the old railroad grade to that Milwaukee Railroad. And this is the old abutment on the west side of the river, still there, standing strong as ever. And when they lowered the Dell's Pond to work on the dam, a lot of these old cribs showed up that were used in part of the old sorting works. But also the footings to these two piers showed up. There's the old abutment on the other side, and there's the two piers all in line. This is where the railroad bridge went across the lower bridge. And then as you went out to the end of Wells Road, where they called Breezy Point, here you can see the part of the old piling to the bridge that went out to the island. There was a hump on the island where there was an abutment there, and then it went across, and this is where it came out the other side in Riverview Park. And all those old pilings are still in there. They flooded these over and covered them up again. And so if you're going up through this channel with your motorboat sometime in low water, you might snag one of these. Well, the next bridge upriver is the 124 or North Crossing Bridge. Here there was no previous bridge to be removed. This was a new location, and so they built the two bridges simultaneously. Here they're putting the steel up, and here's the finished bridges. This is kind of an overview of the whole area with the sound wall along the side there, and they call that the Chinese wall, was kind of a nickname for it in the department. Well, then I'm going to go a little bit further along. This isn't really on the over a river, but this is sort of an interesting thing that I got involved in when I worked there, was the Star Avenue Bridge over the North Crossing. And you see here that the dirt hasn't been dug out underneath. And the reason for that is right along the top of this bank was buried a fiber optic cable. And fiber optic is very hard to connect. If you cut it, you can't just stick it together. It's got to be welded together in a very special way to keep the train of light going through it right. So it's a very expensive process to cut one of these. So what they wanted to do, they only wanted to have to do it once. So as you build the bridge and put us a conduit in the bridge to put our fiber optic through, and then we only have to move it once. But you have to leave this old one in place. Well, it was very close along the side of the bridge, so we had to leave this spill here, and we just dug out a little bit, just enough to put the piers in. Well, then the next bridge over was the railroad bridge, and they said, well, you can't disrupt travel for that long to build a bridge there, so they built what they call a shoe ply. So here's the main line over here, and they built this temporary railroad to bypass the bridge. And so here's the bypass, and here they dug a hole and built a bridge over it. And it's sort of a dry land bridge laying right at ground level, and it looked rather silly sitting there. And the same thing was done on Western Avenue. Here they dug a hole and built a bridge over it. But then after the Star Avenue Bridge was done and the railroad bridge was done, they moved the railroad onto the railroad bridge, and they moved the fiber optics onto the new bridge. Then they could dig this out and complete the trench that the highway runs in. Now we're going to the Eau Claire River. This is the Barstow Street Bridge looking west. First bridge was built there, I believe, about 1857. And there were several different ones there that washed away and had different things happen to those too. In 1905, they built this concrete arch. This is called a filled arch, and we'll see a little bit later what that means. But you can see the old Samuelson's building on the left side there, and the gas works straight ahead. This was the first gas works. Had a big brick round building to hold the gas. They later built a big floating tank that was even bigger than this. Well, this bridge stood there until 1987, and there you can see the things have changed a little bit. The spire off the St. Pat's Church and the distance has been cut down so it isn't as tall, and the gas works is entirely gone. And it was decided this bridge was deteriorating, needed to be replaced. And here they're tearing it down with the wrecking ball. And there you can see that the Samuelson's is gone. Samuelson's had burned down. There's the old wrecking ball going to work. There you can see how the filled arch was. It was a straight concrete arch, and then they filled it with dirt on the top and paved over the top of it. Even though it was dirt, that dirt completely filled the thing, and it was just like having a hydraulic pressure in it, and it gave it its strength. And this is the new bridge that was built in 1987. Well, the next bridge upstream was the Farwell Street Bridge. Well, this bridge didn't have a very long history. This first bridge was built in 1952 when they decided that Barstow Street was just too much traffic on it to handle the highway traffic also. They had the City 12 was routed up, still up Barstow Street. So they built this bridge in 1952. But then they decided it needed to be wider. And in 1985, they tore that bridge out. Here you can see they're dynamiting the center pier and built this wider one that's there today yet. But the next bridge upstream was the Dewey Street Bridge. And this one, the first bridge, was built here in 1857. They rebuilt it again in 67 and again in 75. And this one that's in this picture was built in 1888. And in 1931, they replaced it with this beautiful concrete arch bridge, very similar to the Madison Street Bridge. Well, then about 1980, they discovered that the salt was getting to this one just about the same as it had with the Madison Street Bridge, and it was going to have to be replaced. But they decided they'd had so much trouble getting rid of those arches that the arches were perfectly sound on the Madison Street Bridge, only the upper structures was deteriorated. And so this one they looked over and they found it to be the same, and so they decided it was going to be easier and cheaper to rebuild the top part of this bridge. And so everything from the arches up was removed, and then it was replaced with a similar type bridge, so it still looks the same as it did originally. Well, the next bridge upstream on the Eau Claire River is the Sioux Line Bridge. This was built there sometime about 1890. Is a steel truss bridge that goes diagonally across the river that connected over to the Sioux Line Depot, which was right at the end of Eau Claire Street and Dewey Street. And here you can see the old bridge had a sort of an S curve to it. So there was a curve on each side to make it connect on either side of the river. There's the old Uniroyal, which is now Banbury Place. And the next one upstream is the footbridge, and this is one that's going to have to be replaced soon. This is Eau Claire's only suspension bridge. Actually, cable suspended, same as the Golden Gate. You can see the anchors right down here on the bottom of it. There's the anchors of the cable goes up over the towers, and there's the tower on the other side. There you can see the cables a little better on the view from the north. And here's the view from down below. Here you can see the arch of the cable coming down and goes down about halfway on the railing and then back up again. And if you've ever walked across this and you get a whole bunch of people walking in step, you can get the whole thing swaying, and it's very difficult not to walk in step because it gets bouncing, it hits the bottom of your feet. The whole thing gets going up and down. You can see how that you get too many people doing this, you could destroy the bridge. Well, this is the next bridge upstream, is the Highway 53 bridge. This was taken on the old 1937 aerial photograph. There is no bridge here at all. Now the bridge goes from here. This is the end of Birch Street, and this is where the fire station is now. This is where the bridge comes right down across about here. And this is Spooner Avenue coming from Altoona. This is Fairfax. The building on the corner here was the old county shops, which burned down. The Altoona bus used to come and go around this jog, and then around this jog to go down Hodgeboom Avenue. The end of Hodgeboom Avenue, you see this line going out here, and there's a curve. The old streetcar went out and went around this curve, going to Altoona that way. And all of this area that's now built up into the houses at the end of Woodland Avenue and Main Street was part of the golf course. The old country club building sat right about on the center line of the new Highway 53. Here's that Highway 53 bridge, the first one under construction in 1940. This is the old Drummond Packing Company. It's now still a meat packing company. I'm not sure what the name of it is anymore. This is the bridge as it was finished in about 1941. And here's another view of it from down below. Quite a nice high steel arch building, or steel truss bridge. Another view underneath. This is the other one that we're going to be losing. The Chippewa Valley Museum has this display that was part of the state contributed to it because they're going to lose these two more or less historic bridges, and they contributed some money to the museum to have a display on bridges. This is the second bridge added on 53, was the 3-lane bridge. And now we're going on up to up Otter Creek, and this is the where Highway 12 crossed Otter Creek. This is a single-lane bridge, sort of a truss bridge, and we're looking down here. We can see the old woolen mill that's been gone for many years. There was a dam here just upstream from, or just downstream from the bridge, where this woolen mill was located. Well, in 1931, they replaced that old steel bridge with this concrete arch bridge on Highway 12. They had the concrete spindles on it, or balustrades they call them, that were common in that period. Well, then when Claremont Avenue was made into a 4-lane highway, they removed this bridge and built 2 brand new bridges for a 4-lane structure. But you can still see down here, you can see the old abutment of the old steel bridge. It was just a little bit to the right. The road kind of went on a little bit of an S-curve going down the hill, and that's the old abutment to that steel bridge. And that, surprisingly, that steel bridge is still in existence. In 1931, when they built the first concrete arch bridge there, they moved this bridge over to Spooner Avenue and put it alongside another concrete arch bridge that sat in this location, and made a 2-lane bridge out of it. There was a 1-lane arch bridge, and they took this 1-lane steel bridge and built it right beside the arch bridge, but they weren't actually connected together. There was a little crack down the middle where they were kind of fastened together, but they weren't, so you couldn't fall through. But it was 2 actually separate bridges that expanded and contracted at different rates. But when they tore this bridge down and built the present one on Spooner Avenue, they already had the city water pipe hung underneath this one, and they didn't want to have to move that pipe. And the structure was still good enough to hold the pipe up, and it also now serves as the walkway along Spooner Avenue. Well, now we're going to just, to finish up with, we're going to look at a few rather interesting bridges in the general area within 100 miles or so that are quite unique. This is the lift bridge at Duluth, or they call it the aerial bridge. Here that's opening up to let this 1,000-foot long ore carrier go through. You can see the bridge normally sits down here, and it raises up on these towers to allow the boats to go underneath. But it wasn't originally built that way. Originally it was built, there was a track up here, and they had a car that was suspended by a long beam, and the car would go from side to side. And here's a picture of that old car that would travel back and forth across, and it was sort of like a ferry boat. You had to wait for it to come to your side, and then you would load onto it, and then it would carry you across, and you'd load off on the other side. It actually looks like it's got a paddle on it here. Looks like that's probably something of the cable that wound it back and forth. Or maybe it was in case it fell off, it would become a boat and they could run it to shore. I'm not sure what that, it looks just like a side wheel paddle boat. This is another bridge in the Duluth Superior area. This is the New Bong Bridge. Quite a unique, beautiful bridge with the graceful curves that it has. The reason for the curve was that they had to cross this ship canal at a right angle because of the span of it. So they had to make a little bit of a curve to get the bridge in there. It's quite a beautiful structure. See an old swing railroad bridge in the background there. Another bridge down. This one's on the St. Croix River. This is the Railroad High Bridge. This is 189 feet above the water, crossing the St. Croix River from bluff to bluff. This is north of Stillwater, and is still in use today as the main line of the Sioux Line. And this is the bridge that they'll be taking a trip in the spring of 2000 up on the 2719 engine, you'll be able to take a trip and ride across this bridge. Next one down the line is the old Hudson Bridge. This was a toll bridge that was operated from 1913 to 1951. It had this causeway that came out from the east side, and here's the toll house, and you went up a steep grade, and then you went over a real sharp break. There was no curve to this at all. It just went kabump over this to the level bridge, and then it went steeper up to the Minnesota side. And some of those old pilings and piers are still in place. You can see them if you look for them. This is the old toll house. It's at the bottom of the bridge, and one time a fellow stopped to pay his toll, and he got run over by a runaway truck there. Completely smashed his car, and him too. This is the bridge that was built in 1951, was a steel truss bridge. Here you can see the old bridge in the background, and the causeway that ran out to it. This is doing the rivets on the very top. This fellow is Sam Retallick, who's still around and works for the museum at times. He was the rivet inspector on that bridge. This is at the very peak of the top of the bridge. There's a picture. This is one of these peaks is where they were working, right on the top of the bridge here. This is when the second bridge was built alongside of it. This one is 4 lanes wide, where the other one was only 2 lanes wide. And now that has been, this is the picture taken at night. The different colored lights, the red lights are the navigation lights on the river, and the orange lights are mercury vapor lights. And the green lights are another type of gas light that when you put it all together in a time exposure, gives it this pretty color. This is the third bridge added in the middle between the other two. And here they're tearing down the steel bridge. This is another interesting bridge that isn't too far away. This is the only automobile suspension bridge that I know of nearby. This is the Hennepin Avenue Bridge in Minneapolis. This is another interesting bridge in the Twin Cities. This is the old St. Paul High Bridge. It's very high up above the Mississippi River. Went sort of on a diagonal from the low side to the high side. And that was recently replaced with this arch bridge. And this is the old Hastings Bridge with the old spiral loop to get up to it. This was designed in the days of horses. And they wanted to get up from downtown Hastings right up to the bridge, and so the simplest way to do it was to go around a loop. Well, when they got automobiles, that was a little bit harder to negotiate this loop. Some of them ran through the edge, and of course now the bridge is about the same height, the new bridge that's in there, but it continues quite a few blocks beyond the main street of Hastings. This is the old lift bridge at Prescott. This is one that raised up. You can see these are the counterweights for the bridge, and it goes from the counterweight up over a pulley and down to the bridge. And it doesn't take an awful lot of effort to crank this bridge up, and the counterweights go down to balance it. It's got to be, they maintain the balance on it pretty close. And this is the old house. The house is at the top here, that where they control it from. And here was the motor, and the leverage, or the operation was quite simple. They had one lever here for forward and back, and they had a start-stop button for the motor. And it was all done pretty much one man controlling it. And if all else failed, if the power went out, they had a capstan where they could take 4 people and crank the bridge up and down by hand. Well, that was replaced with this drawbridge that opens up, and the unique thing about this is the way it operates. There's a tremendous weight, and you couldn't put all that weight on a single shaft. It would wear through very fast because of the tremendous weight of it. And so they've got this big rocker here that's built right into the frame of the bridge, This is the part that goes up, and back here is a big, huge counterweight of concrete behind it. And the way this works, there's a rack gear along here, and this pinion that runs in it. Well, this gear turns in this direction. It pulls the shaft along this line up here, and as it pulls it, it rolls the bridge on this arc so that the part tips up like this. By pulling it this way, and it sort of opens up as it starts to roll, it spreads apart. There you can see the big gear that runs in a track at the bottom, where this is where the weight actually rolls on this track here. Of course, they pick up their cables, and this is under construction. This is all hidden underneath. You can't see this now. It's all enclosed. This is while it was being built. And here is the control room for it. It looks like you could fly a 747 with this control. It's quite a bit more complicated than the old one was. Another bridge going on downstream. This is the one at Red Wing. This is taken off from the Barn Bluff. And I think they used to have a rule that they had to have a 90-degree corner in all of these bridges, because this one had one here that came over and made this sharp turn at quite a high altitude here. And this bridge was built in 1957. It's called the Eisenhower Bridge. And there they took the curve out and went straight across and built the road on across the Wisconsin Channel straight across, so you didn't have any sharp corner in anymore. But as you get down, you get into town, you still have to make a 90-degree turn. The next bridge on downstream was the Wabasha Bridge, and of course it had its two 90-degree corners. The first one at quite a high level here, and this was pretty narrow. And semi-trucks, the big 65-foot semi-trucks, had to use the whole road. They'd pull way over on this side, and they'd come across here, and they'd be there, their truck right up against the railing here, and they'd be scraping the middle of it on this part, and just about scraping the back over here. Well, this bridge was replaced, and they did this kind of a unique way. They had to keep the traffic open on the river for the barges, so they couldn't block the channel for very long. So what they did, they built this bridge on these barges. They built it up on big tall things and assembled it all up in the air like this over on the side. And then they floated the barges out into position. You can see they're going to float it over and set it on these two supports here. But they did it all in one day to bring that span out there and set it into position. Well, there's another kind of a unique bridge that was over on North Main Street in Neillsville. And I don't know what you'd call this, if you'd call it a concrete pony truss, or exactly what it is. It's an open truss, but the truss is made of poured concrete. It looks like something you might expect to see in Germany or something. And besides that, it's skewed. You can see the one side is skewed away from the other side. It went diagonally across the Black River. This, of course, has been replaced since this one was getting a little shaky, and so it was replaced. We had to get a picture of it before they took it down. Here's another unique bridge in the Black River Falls area. This is one at Hatfield, and this one was designed by Owen Ayers from Eau Claire here, and they won an award for this. Well, that's all for now. This is Dick Feeney saying goodbye until next time.